The small town was quiet, the kind of place where people noticed everything their neighbors did. At the edge of this town stood an old hangar, rusty and forgotten by most. Its walls were faded, its roof had holes, and weeds grew all around it. To almost everyone, it looked like a useless shed, but for one man, a father who lived in a small house nearby, the hangar was something different. He saw meaning in it, while others only saw broken walls. He saw memories and possibilities. This man, known by the town simply as Mr. Harris, did not have much money. He worked small jobs here and there, fixing fences, cleaning yards, or helping farmers with repairs. His clothes were simple and his shoes were worn from years of use. People in town would say he was a kind man, always polite, always gentle. But behind their kind words, there was also laughter. They laughed at the way he spent so much time in that hangar. Every morning, after finishing his chores, Mr. Harris would walk slowly to the hangar carrying a small bag of tools. Sometimes it was a hammer and nails, sometimes just a cloth and polish. He would unlock the heavy door, push it open, and disappear inside for hours. His family often wondered what he did in there. His children sometimes followed him and peeked through the cracks in the door. All they saw was their father dusting, sweeping, or bending over some old piece of wood or metal. To them, it looked boring, even foolish. At family gatherings, the topic often came up. "Dad spends all day in that old hangar," one of his sons would say with a laugh. "It's nothing but junk in there." The others would join in, chuckling, shaking their heads. His wife, though not cruel, sighed whenever someone mentioned it. She had asked him many times, "Why do you waste your time there? You could rest, or you could do something useful for the family." But Mr. Harris only smiled softly and said, "It matters more than you think." No one believed him. They thought he was holding on to old dreams, maybe even old stories his own father told him long ago. The hangar had once belonged to his family, passed down through the years, but most people assumed it had nothing inside worth keeping. To them, it was only an eyesore, a building too weak to fix and too broken to use. Neighbors walking by would sometimes stop and joke. "Harris, you're still working on that place. You'll never make it new again." He would just nod, not angry, not hurt, only calm. He was used to people not understanding him. Children passing by on bikes would sometimes laugh loudly, pointing at the old man polishing broken handles or sweeping dust. But Mr. Harris kept working day after day as though he knew something they didn't. Inside the hangar, the air was always heavy with the smell of old wood, oil, and rust. Shafts of sunlight came in through holes in the roof, lighting up floating dust like tiny stars. Mr. Harris would stand still for a moment, looking around at the shelves, the crates, and the forgotten corners. He treated the place with quiet respect, almost as though he were visiting a church. He touched the walls with care, his fingers running across scratches and marks made many years ago. Sometimes he found old bolts or broken hinges and kept them neatly in small boxes. Sometimes he fixed a piece of wood, sanding it until it was smooth. Other times he just sat on a wooden chair, notebook in hand, writing thoughts that no one else ever read. His children thought he was wasting paper, scribbling things that had no value. But for him, each note was part of a bigger puzzle. His late father once told him that the hangar was more than it looked. As a young boy, Mr. Harris remembered sitting with his father who whispered, "Take care of this place. It holds stories no one must forget." At the time, he didn't understand, but those words never left him. And so, year after year, he returned to the hangar, driven by something invisible yet powerful. At home, things were not easy. The family often struggled to pay bills. Sometimes the lights went out because the electricity bill was late. His children wore hand-me-down clothes, and his wife worried about food on the table. She grew tired of seeing her husband walk to the hangar when there were so many other problems. One evening at dinner, his daughter spoke up. "Dad, why do you keep wasting time in that old place?" "My friends ask me why you care so much about it, and I don't know what to say." The table went quiet, everyone waiting for his answer. Mr. Harris simply looked at her kindly and said, "One day you'll know why. Until then, let them laugh." His children groaned, rolling their eyes while his wife shook her head. The laughter did not stop. Relatives visiting during holidays joked about it too. "Still with the hangar, huh? That place should be torn down." Everyone laughed except Mr. Harris, who only smiled faintly and poured himself a cup of tea. To them, his silence meant he was embarrassed. But deep inside, his silence meant he was holding on to a secret hope. As the seasons changed, the hangar seemed to grow weaker. Rain leaked through the roof and strong winds rattled its walls. The family became more certain that it was falling apart, a waste of energy to even try to save it. But strangely, Mr. Harris grew more determined. The worse it looked, the harder he worked. He patched holes with whatever materials he could find, often using scraps given by neighbors who thought he was foolish for even trying. He carried heavy beams by himself, sweating and coughing but never complaining. He stayed late at night polishing rusted pieces until they shone faintly in the dim light. He kept notebooks filled with sketches of the hangar, marking where beams connected, where panels overlapped, and where shadows seemed to fall differently. People wondered why he cared so much. Some whispered that maybe he was just lonely. Others said he was too proud to admit defeat. His family sometimes avoided the subject altogether, tired of arguing. But the truth was simple. Mr. Harris felt a connection to the place that no one else could see. One rainy afternoon, as thunder shook the sky, he sat inside the hangar with his old notebook open. Rain dripped from the roof and the floor was muddy near the door, but he sat calmly flipping pages of his notes, reading what he had written years before. There were small maps, arrows pointing to certain corners, and words like hidden joint and check beneath. He pressed his hand against the damp floor, feeling something uneven beneath it. His heart beat a little faster. Outside, no one knew what was going through his mind. To them, it was just another day of their father wasting time. To him, it was the beginning of something he could finally sense was close. He had no proof, only a strong belief that his father's words were true. The hangar was more than broken walls. Still, he said nothing to anyone. He kept his secret, letting the family think what they wanted. They laughed, they mocked, and they doubted. But Mr. Harris walked home every evening with quiet determination in his eyes, carrying his small bag of tools like a soldier carrying his duty. The old hangar stood in silence each night, but inside, the father's dream was alive. He was certain he was walking toward something that would one day change everything. The days kept moving forward, and Mr. Harris returned to the hangar as if it were his second home. To the outside world, nothing seemed to change. The rusty roof still leaked when it rained. The weeds around the walls still grew wild, and the dust inside still covered almost everything. But to him, each day brought new discoveries. He looked at details others ignored, small scratches, faded labels, and marks left on beams. He carried a small notebook everywhere, and in that notebook he drew sketches, wrote questions, and sometimes even taped little scraps of paper he found inside the hangar. The family, however, grew more restless. His children were embarrassed when friends asked, "Why is your dad always at that broken hangar?" They had no answer. His wife became worried about money. Bills stacked up, and there was always something that needed to be paid. "We can't afford to keep wasting time like this," she told him one evening. "We need more work, more income, not hours spent in that place." But Mr. Harris looked at her with calm eyes and answered softly, "I'm not wasting time. I'm building something you can't see yet." No one understood him. At night, when the family slept, he stayed awake by candlelight, reading old books he borrowed from the library. He searched for anything related to World War II, old airfields, and abandoned hangars. He underlined passages about storage facilities, hidden equipment, and forgotten records. Sometimes he copied down whole sections by hand, filling his notebook with notes and references. His children would wake up and find him asleep at the table, his head resting on the open pages of a history book. They laughed gently among themselves. "Dad thinks he's some kind of historian," one son said. Another added, "He's acting like a detective, but it's just junk." The laughter reached his ears, but he did not respond. He knew they didn't see what he saw. Each weekend he visited a nearby town where older veterans still gathered at the park. He sat with them, listening to their stories, asking questions about airfields, old missions, and forgotten planes. Some of the men laughed at his curiosity, but others grew quiet, remembering things they had not spoken about in years. One veteran mentioned how supplies were sometimes hidden in hangars to keep them safe. Another spoke of maps drawn in secret, showing storage spots no one ever checked again after the war. Mr. Harris listened carefully, never interrupting, only writing notes in his small book. When he returned to the hangar, he compared their words with his own sketches. He walked around the walls, touching the beams, checking where the light fell, testing the floor with his feet. Sometimes he tapped the ground with a hammer, listening for hollow sounds. His children thought it looked ridiculous, but for him, each sound meant something. He also spent time repairing broken machines inside. There were old engines, rusted metal frames, and crates covered in dust. With patience, he polished them, tightened bolts, and tried to make them look whole again. To others, it was just scrap, but for him, it was respect. He believed every piece inside the hangar carried history. One evening, his wife walked into the hangar, wiping her hands on her apron. She stood there, watching him bend over an old engine, polishing it with care. "Why do you do this?" she asked, her voice a mix of sadness and frustration. "You spend hours here, and for what?" "We can't eat rust. We can't pay bills with dust." He put the cloth down and looked at her, his face gentle but firm. "This place is not just rust and dust. It's a story. My father told me to protect it. He said one day it would matter. I don't know how yet, but I trust his words." She sighed, shaking her head. "Your father filled your head with dreams, and now our children laugh at you because of it." She turned and walked out, leaving him alone again. He sat quietly, staring at the floor, then picked up his notebook and made another sketch. The more they doubted him, the more determined he became. He began to notice small details others never would. On one wall, there were marks that looked like someone had once moved heavy crates. On the floor, near the far corner, the boards felt slightly uneven. He made careful notes about these things. At night, he studied the hangar's blueprints, which he had found in the town's records office. The papers were yellow and fragile, but they showed the original design. Strangely, some areas on the blueprint didn't match the current hangar. There were sections that seemed to lead nowhere, empty spaces marked as storage. This discovery made his heart race. What if something had been hidden there? Still, he told no one. He knew that if he mentioned it, his family would laugh louder than before. So he worked in silence. Winter came, and the cold winds blew through the cracks in the hangar walls. His hands grew stiff, his breath came out in clouds, but he kept working. Sometimes his children brought him tea, pretending to be kind, but they couldn't hide their smirks. "Still searching for buried treasure, Dad?" they teased. He only smiled faintly and replied, "Not treasure, truth." As the months passed, his notebooks filled with more drawings and questions. He circled certain areas of the hangar, wrote down measurements, and even tried simple experiments like pouring water on the floor to see where it flowed. Every detail mattered to him. His family thought he was going too far. During one family dinner, his oldest son said sharply, "Dad, you're wasting your life in that place. We're tired of hearing about the hangar. You should stop before people start calling you crazy." The table went silent, waiting for his reply. Mr. Harris calmly put down his fork and said softly, "One day, when the truth comes out, you'll be proud. Until then, let me work." His voice carried such quiet strength that even his son had no answer. After that night, he worked even harder. He borrowed a metal detector from a friend and began scanning the floor inch by inch. Each beep made his heart jump, but most of the time it was just nails or scraps of wire. Still, he refused to give up. He also began writing letters to museums and historians asking about forgotten storage sites. Some never replied, but a few sent back notes confirming that during the war, equipment and supplies were often hidden in local hangars to protect them. These small confirmations fueled his belief. While his family laughed, he felt himself getting closer to something real. He didn't know what it was yet, but he felt the pieces coming together. The uneven floors, the strange marks on the walls, the hidden spaces on the blueprint. All of it pointed toward a secret buried deep inside the hangar. He sat late at night by candlelight, staring at his notes, his hands trembling slightly with excitement. He whispered to himself, "Father, I'm getting closer. I will find what you wanted me to." To the family, he was just a stubborn man chasing a silly dream. But in his heart, he knew he was walking toward something that could change everything. The world laughed, but he kept moving step by step toward the moment that would silence them all. The weeks moved on, and the tension inside the Harris family kept growing. The hangar had become more than just a strange hobby to them. It was now a constant source of arguments. His children were no longer just embarrassed, they were angry. His wife no longer only sighed, she begged him to stop. One Saturday morning, as the family sat down for breakfast, his oldest son finally spoke his heart. "Dad, enough is enough. You've been wasting years in that old place. You come home smelling of dust and oil. and we have nothing to show for it. Don't you care about us? His words were sharp, carrying the frustration of everyone at the table. His wife nodded slowly, her eyes heavy with worry. We need you here, not there. The bills are overdue. We need more work, not more time lost in the hangar. The other children joined in, their voices rising one after another. Why don't you listen, Dad? Why do you believe in something that isn't real? You're stubborn and you don't care about us. The words struck hard, but Mr. Harris did not raise his voice. He sat still, his hands folded on the table. His face was calm, though inside his heart ached. After a long silence, he spoke in a quiet but steady tone. One day you will understand. I cannot explain it now, but I know what I am doing. I will not stop. The family groaned, some rolling their eyes, others slamming their spoons on the table. The breakfast ended in silence. His children left quickly, muttering under their breath, while his wife cleared the table with a heavy heart. That night, Mr. Harris walked alone to the hangar, carrying his lantern and small bag of tools. The air was cold and the stars above seemed far away. When he opened the heavy door, the familiar smell of rust and old wood welcomed him. He set the lantern on the table, sat in his chair, and opened his notebook. He thought about the argument at breakfast, about the way his children looked at him, about his wife's tired eyes. For a moment, his shoulders sagged. He felt the weight of their disappointment pressing down on him. But then, as he ran his hand over the floor near the corner he had been studying, he remembered his father's words again. Take care of this place. It holds stories no one must forget. The memory gave him strength. For weeks he had been focusing on a section of the hangar floor that felt different. The boards there were slightly raised, the sound beneath them not as solid as the rest. He had already drawn sketches of the spot, measured its length and width, and marked it in his notebook. Tonight he decided to act. He took his small hammer and gently tapped the boards. The sound was hollow, different from the rest of the floor. His heart beat faster. Slowly, carefully, he began loosening the nails that held the planks in place. The wood creaked under his touch, as if resisting after decades of silence. Finally, one board lifted, revealing dark soil beneath. He leaned closer, shining the lantern into the gap. It was not much, just dirt and small rocks, but it confirmed what he already suspected. There was space below the hangar. He replaced the board quickly, covering his work. He knew he could not rush. He needed to be patient, careful, and precise. The next morning, his family noticed the dirt on his clothes. What were you doing last night? One of his sons asked with suspicion. Mr. Harris only smiled faintly and said, just cleaning. The children exchanged looks, shaking their heads. They thought he was losing his mind. But in truth, he was closer than ever before. Each day after that, he returned to the spot, removing one board at a time when no one was watching. He dug quietly, little by little, using only small tools so no one outside would hear. He carried the soil away in buckets and poured it into the garden, mixing it so no one noticed. Every night when he returned home, he was more tired than the day before. His hands grew blistered, his back sore, but his eyes shone with determination. His wife noticed the change and worried even more. You're hurting yourself for nothing, she said one evening. Please stop before it's too late. He looked at her kindly, touched her hand, and whispered, It's not for nothing. As the days passed, his secret digging revealed more. The soil grew looser, and soon he discovered something solid buried beneath. At first, it looked like a piece of rusted metal. He brushed away the dirt carefully. His breath caught in his throat. It was a corner of a large box. He tapped it gently with his hammer, and the hollow sound echoed faintly in the dark space. He closed the boards quickly, covering his work again. His heart pounded with excitement and fear. Was this the beginning of the secret his father had spoken of? Or was it just old junk buried years ago? Meanwhile, the tension at home reached a breaking point. At another family dinner, his daughter finally burst out in frustration. Dad, we're tired of this. People laugh at us because of you. Everyone in town says you're wasting your life. Do you even care about what they say? The room grew quiet. All eyes turned to Mr. Harris. He set his fork down, folded his hands, and said in a calm voice, Let them laugh. Let them mock. I know what I am doing. One day you will see why I never gave up. His words silenced the table. Some shook their heads, others looked away, but no one replied. They knew they could not change his mind. After that dinner, he spent even longer hours at the hangar. He worked by lantern light, sweat dripping down his face as he dug deeper. The box beneath the floor became clearer each night. It was large, heavy, and sealed shut. He wiped away the soil, revealing markings on its surface, faded letters and numbers that looked military. His hands trembled as he traced the letters, though he could not yet read them clearly. He sat back, breathing heavily, staring at the box buried beneath the floorboards. It was real. His father's words had been true. There was something hidden in the hangar, something no one had believed in but him. Still, he told no one. Not yet. He wanted to be sure before revealing anything. He covered the hole, replaced the boards, and swept the floor clean. To the family, nothing had changed. To him, everything had. Each step he took toward home that night felt lighter, even though his body was tired. He knew he was close to proving everyone wrong. He knew he was close to uncovering a truth that would silence every laugh and every doubt. The world outside thought he was a poor dreamer, wasting his time in a broken hangar. But inside, beneath the floor, the first pieces of a forgotten secret were waiting to be revealed. The night was cold when Mr. Harris finally decided it was time to see what was inside the buried box. For weeks he had been digging in secret, slowly uncovering more of its surface. His hands were rough, his arms ached, and his back felt stiff, but none of that mattered. Each night as he worked, the markings on the metal became clearer. The faded letters looked military, and the numbers seemed like codes. He knew now that this was no ordinary junk. He waited until his family was asleep before slipping out of the house with his lantern and tools. The town was quiet, with only the sound of the wind moving through the trees. When he reached the hangar and pushed open the heavy doors, it felt as though the old building was holding its breath. He placed the lantern on the table, pulled up the boards, and climbed down into the dark space he had created. The box was almost fully revealed now. Its surface was thick with rust, but its shape was solid. He touched the cold metal and whispered, "What are you hiding?" Slowly he worked at the lock with his tools. At first it didn't move, but after hours of effort and sweat there was a sharp crack. The lock gave way. His heart pounded as he lifted the lid. Inside, the lantern light fell on stacks of papers wrapped in wax cloth, metal parts carefully packed in straw, and small wooden crates sealed with tape. He picked up one of the papers, unwrapped it, and saw diagrams of aircraft, detailed maps, and old documents stamped with official seals. His hands shook. These were not simple notes. They were historical records left untouched for decades. He reached for one of the smaller crates and pried it open. Inside lay shining instruments, altimeters, gauges, and rare aviation tools. Though dusty, they looked preserved. He stared in awe, realizing these parts could have belonged to planes once used during the war. He covered his mouth with one hand, fighting back a gasp. He was not imagining things. The hangar truly held a forgotten treasure. The next morning, his family noticed something different in him. He smiled quietly at breakfast, his eyes brighter, his steps lighter. His children exchanged puzzled looks. "Why is he so happy?" one whispered. His wife studied him, trying to understand, but he said nothing. He wasn't ready to reveal his discovery. Not yet. He wanted proof. Over the next days, he carefully inspected each item from the box. He cleaned the papers, dried them gently, and placed them in protective sleeves. He wiped down the instruments, polishing them until their numbers and dials shone under the lantern light. He realized this was only the beginning. If one box was hidden, maybe there were more, so he dug deeper. And soon enough, his hand struck another hard surface. This time it wasn't one box, but several, stacked and buried beneath the soil. He uncovered them one by one, his excitement growing with every discovery. Inside the boxes were aircraft parts, pilot gear, flight logs, and more crates filled with sealed envelopes. Some items were wrapped in canvas stamped with dates from the 1940s. It was overwhelming. He sat on the ground, staring at the collection, tears welling in his eyes. For years, his family had called it a waste of time. For years, neighbors had mocked him. But now, right in front of him was proof that his father had been right all along. The hangar had been a secret storage site, and he had just uncovered history that had been hidden for decades. But Mr. Harris knew he could not keep this to himself. He needed an expert. The next day, he wrote a letter to a local historian he had once met at the library. He invited him to come and see the discovery. When the historian arrived, he looked doubtful at first, but the moment Mr. Harris lifted the boards and showed him the crates, his expression changed completely. His eyes widened and his voice shook with excitement. "Do you realize what this is? These are original World War II artifacts. This could be worth millions, and it's priceless for history." The historian called colleagues, and soon a team of experts visited the hangar. They examined the items carefully, documenting each one. The more they looked, the more shocked they became. Rare flight manuals, original blueprints of aircraft, preserved instruments, even uniforms, all of it untouched since the war. They explained that such items were not only of huge historical value, but also carried enormous financial worth to museums and collectors. News spread quickly. Reporters came with cameras, eager to capture the story of the poor father who had uncovered a hidden treasure. Headlines soon appeared. Forgotten Hangar reveals $111 million in historical artifacts, and local man's obsession uncovers priceless war history. His family could hardly believe it. The same children who once laughed at him now stood speechless as they watched reporters interview their father. His wife, who had begged him to stop, now held his hand with tears in her eyes. Neighbors who once joked about the hangar now came to stare in amazement. The old building that was once mocked as useless was now the center of attention. One evening, after the experts had finished their work, the family gathered inside the hangar. The crates were still there, some open, showing their incredible contents. His children stood quietly, their faces filled with awe. Finally, his oldest son spoke, his voice low. "Dad, we were wrong. We're sorry. We didn't believe you. But you never gave up." Mr. Harris smiled gently, his eyes soft. "I told you. One day you would understand." His wife hugged him tightly, whispering, "I should have trusted you." The hangar, once filled with laughter and doubt, was now filled with respect. Historians praised Mr. Harris for his patience and dedication. Museums offered to buy parts of the collection, while others wanted to display them in his name. Collectors from around the world offered millions, valuing the discovery at more than $100 million. But for Mr. Harris, the money was not the most important part. What mattered to him was that his father's words had come true, and that history once buried was now alive again. He had kept his promise, and the world finally saw the truth. As he stood in the hangar, lantern light shining on the uncovered treasures, he felt peace. For years, people had called his work a waste of time. Now their laughter was gone, replaced by silence, respect, and wonder. The poor father who had been mocked for his old hangar had turned out to be the guardian of a hidden past, and his discovery would be remembered forever. The discovery inside the old hangar changed everything for Mr. Harris and his family. Just weeks before, they had laughed, argued, and even shouted at him for spending his days in that dusty place. But now the same hangar was at the center of attention, drawing reporters, experts, and even government officials. The story spread far beyond their small town, and strangers began arriving to catch a glimpse of the man who had uncovered history worth over $100 million. The family, once ashamed, now walked with their heads high. His children, who used to roll their eyes whenever someone mentioned the hangar, now proudly told friends, "That was our dad. He's the one who found it." His wife, who had spent years worrying about bills and mocking whispers from neighbors, now stood by his side with tears of joy in her eyes. She had seen him mocked, ignored, and doubted, yet he never gave up. The hangar itself no longer looked like an old broken shed. Experts carefully cleaned and repaired it, making sure the building could safely hold the treasures found inside. Display lights were added, glass cases set up, and historians worked day and night to preserve the fragile documents. Where once there had been silence and dust, now there was life, voices, and respect. Mr. Harris never sought fame, but fame found him. He was invited to speak at universities and history clubs. Students wanted to shake his hand, journalists wanted his story, and museum directors begged to purchase items from his discovery. He accepted only a few offers, choosing instead to keep most of the collection together. "It belongs here," he told them. "This hangar is its home." Money came quickly once the value of the artifacts was announced. Collectors offered millions for rare pieces, and museums paid large sums to borrow items for exhibitions. In total, the collection was valued at more than $111 million. For a man who once struggled to pay bills, it felt unbelievable. But Mr. Harris remained the same humble father he had always been. He used the money wisely, paying off debts, repairing his home, and setting aside funds for his children's future. The family, once doubtful, now looked at him with new eyes. His oldest son, who had once called him stubborn and foolish, now admitted, "Dad, I didn't believe you. I thought you were chasing a dream, but you never gave up, And you were right all along." Mr. Harris placed a hand on his son's shoulder and smiled. "Sometimes the world cannot see what you see. That doesn't mean you stop believing." His daughter, who had been embarrassed to talk about him at school, now proudly told everyone about her father's courage and patience. She hugged him one evening and whispered, "I'm sorry for laughing at you, Dad. I didn't know. I didn't understand." He kissed her forehead gently and said, "You don't need to be sorry. You understand now, and that's enough." Even the neighbors who once teased him now came to shake his hand. "We didn't think anything would come of it," they admitted. "You proved us all wrong." Mr. Harris did not show anger or pride. He simply nodded and said, "It was never about proving you wrong. It was about keeping a promise." The promise he spoke of was the one he had made long ago to his father, to protect the hangar and the stories it held. And now, as he walked through the restored building, seeing schoolchildren learning about history inside, he felt that promise had been fully kept. One day, as he stood near the glass case holding the very first box he had opened, a reporter asked him, "Mr. Harris, what does this moment mean to you? After all the laughter, the doubts, the years of hard work, what do you feel now?" He paused for a long moment, looking at the treasures around him. Then, in his calm, steady voice, he answered, "It means that patience is never wasted. People may laugh at you, call you foolish, or tell you to stop. But if you know in your heart that something is true, you must keep going. Sometimes what looks like a waste of time is simply a treasure waiting for its moment." His words were printed in newspapers across the country, and many people found inspiration in his story. Teachers told their students about him. Families shared his story at dinner tables, and in homes far away, strangers spoke of the poor father who never gave up on an old hangar and uncovered a secret worth more than gold. Life changed for the Harris family in ways they never imagined. They no longer worried about bills. They no longer felt embarrassed when people asked about their father. Instead, they stood proudly beside him, grateful for his faith and determination. Yet despite all the fame and wealth, Mr. Harris himself remained simple. He still wore the same old shoes, still greeted neighbors kindly, and still walked to the hangar every morning carrying his small bag of tools. Only now when he entered, he was not alone. There were always visitors, historians, students, tourists, who wanted to hear him tell the story in his own words. He never grew tired of sharing it. Each time he told it, his eyes would shine as he remembered the years of quiet work, the laughter he endured, and the night he first opened that box. He wanted people to understand not just the discovery but the journey, because for him, the real treasure was not only the millions of dollars or the artifacts, but the lesson that patience and faith can outlast doubt and laughter. As time passed, the hangar became more than a building. It became a museum, a place where history lived again. His name was placed on a plaque at the entrance, and visitors from around the world came to see it. His children often guided groups through the building, telling them proudly, "Our father made this possible." The laughter of the past was gone. In its place was silence, silence filled with respect, wonder, and admiration. The poor dad who had been mocked for years was now a symbol of perseverance and quiet strength. On quiet evenings, when the visitors had left and the hangar was calm again, Mr. Harris would sit in his old wooden chair, the same one he had used during the lonely years when no one believed in him. He would close his eyes, listen to the silence, and whisper softly, "I did it, Father. I kept the promise." And in those moments he felt the peace of knowing that he had turned doubt into belief, laughter into respect, and an old hangar into a story that would live on for generations.